So that's a quick overview of the existential perspective, and now we're going to talk about the Gestalt theory and Gestalt therapy. This is also going to be an overview, and I really encourage you to spend some time with your text and other resources in getting a deeper understanding of both of these theories. But as I said, you're going to see a lot of overlap as we move into Gestalt therapy. And Gestalt therapy has been described as a reaction or alternative to psychoanalysis and behavior therapy. People started to talk about Gestalt therapy in the 1940s and 50s, and as a different approach, different from psychoanalysis and behavior therapy, the approaches that were most popular at that time. And then the names we associate with the development of this Gestalt approach, primarily Fritz Perls, P-E-R-L-S, also Laura Perls, and several others, and a lot of people more recently doing a lot of work with Gestalt theory and the application of Gestalt theory in rehabilitation counseling. And its origin and through the 60s and 70s, the main people we think about are Fritz Perls and Laura Perls. Another theorist who studied in the psychoanalytic perspective, but moved away from that perspective and developed a sort of unique approach. We want to make a couple of distinctions before we move into it. There is a Gestalt psychology that people talk about, and Gestalt psychology going on since at least since earlier in the 20th century, really had more to do with studying perception and how humans perceive the world. So there was some overlap in the concepts that the Gestalt psychology was talking about with what we're talking about in Gestalt psychotherapy, but also some very different perspectives. So really a related but different sort of animal. So while retaining the premise of change through self-understanding, so another insight-oriented perspective, this theory involves active rather than passive counselor interaction and a real engagement with the client, as opposed to the blank screen approach that we talked about in psychoanalysis. Key concepts here. It is an active and another very present-centered approach to counseling. The counselor will be active and very present in the counseling discussion. It's experiential. We'll talk about that. It is a humanistic perspective, phenomenological perspective, and we will be talking about holism. And you know that Gestalt was not a psychologist, not a person, but it is a word that means essentially the whole, the perceptual whole. So all the parts seen as one whole, and we're talking about seeing people that way, seeing all the parts of the person as a perceptual whole, and we'll be talking about that idea. The affective, the behavioral, so the emotional, the behavioral, the sensory, the cognitive or thinking aspects, and the interpersonal relationship aspects, all coming together within the individual and understanding ourselves as complex but interrelated wholes. The overlap, as I said, it will become more and more clear that these theories share a lot of ideas, but particularly the focus on the here and now, and the focus on awareness, and being aware that we have the opportunity and the responsibility to make decisions, that we are always making decisions about who we are in the world and helping people to make authentic decisions based on self-understanding and self-awareness. In terms of the view of human nature, from the Gestalt perspective, people are seen as having the capacity to grow, develop, and become the person they desire to be. People have the ability to define their own reality and make their own choices. And people are inherently self-regulating. We are balance-seeking. We seek homeostasis. We are, in other words, motivated to solve problems as they come up. We try to resolve them and get back into a balanced state or homeostatic state. We use our abilities, our capacities, our resources to get balance again. Needs emerge, problems emerge, and we deal with these in the order of importance. We use our resources and the environment in the best way that we can. Okay, important idea. So people are using the resources that they have in the best way that they can to solve the problems that they have. But people are also frequently unreal and not integrated, so not those various parts of themselves are not being accepted, not being seen by the person or accepted by the person as a part of themselves. And so sometimes what we do in Gestalt theory is help people to accept and become aware of the different polarities, the different extremes of their personality and their experience, to accept all of who we are, and to use that knowledge to be authentic and real in the world. Awareness is the idea of being in touch with our existence. What we are aware of, what exists for us, is our reality. It's another, we talked about this idea when we talked about person-centered theory. What we are thinking about, what we are aware of, this is what we are, this is our reality. And then self-regulation. We talked about basically this idea that we are trying to achieve balance and homeostasis, and some of these terms associated with the Gestalt psychology perspective. But when what is greatest concern to the person comes into awareness, we call that moving into the foreground. So the problem, the concern, moves from the background, it becomes a part of the foreground, it becomes a part of our focus. We experience it, we cope with it, we accept it or change it, and then through the process of therapy, we deal with it so that it can be integrated, forgotten, or assimilated, made a part of ourselves, and then it melts back into the background, and we return to balance. Holism, we've talked about, and from this perspective, we're saying that people cannot be understood except as wholes, and what that means is all aspects of functioning have to be taken into consideration. So we work in Gestalt therapy with the whole person, the way they're thinking, feeling, what they're experiencing physically, and relations. And also people must be understood in the context of their environments. And the equation here from field theory, which basically says behavior, the way the person is acting, is a function of the person in the context of their environment. And we can't leave that idea out. We can't take the person out of the context of the environment. If we really want to understand people and their behavior, we need to look at where the behavior is happening in the context and environment in which people are behaving. Another key idea is the focus on the here and now. Direct experience. In other words, what we are actually doing in the counseling session is the primary tool of Gestalt therapy. Here and now. The past and present the past and the future do not exist except in the present, and we need to appreciate and fully experience the present moment. So again, you would not see a Gestalt therapist spending a lot of time talking about childhood and past experiences, except as they are affecting the person in the present. Okay, this is a term that has one of those terms that has achieved so popular understanding. We talk a lot about this person has unfinished business, and unfinished business is unexpressed feelings, which we refer to also in this context as incomplete gestaltens. So the idea that the feelings, the response, the situation is not whole because there's something left out. There's something that hasn't been said that we need to say. So unexpressed feelings exist from previous relationships, things from previous experiences haven't been dealt with, and because they haven't been expressed or dealt with, they continue to affect us in the present, and they prevent us from fully living. So awareness of, becoming aware of, and then dealing with these unexpressed feelings, unexpressed words, dealing with these becomes curative. In other words, it helps us to become better. All right, the idea of the contact boundary. Interesting idea. Life is relational, meaning that people live in relationships with others. We define ourselves by how we experience others. There is no I except in relation to others. So again, this is an idea that we've talked about before, that we exist in relationship with others. We are social creatures, and people are also driven toward homeostasis or balance. And when we are out of balance, we develop needs, and we're talking about relational needs. We feel like we have some need that's not being met. We have some problem that we are not effectively addressing. We become out of balance, out of sync, out of homeostatic state, and so we develop a need. We need to get back in balance, and we meet these needs by and through contact with and withdrawal from the social environment. So we go to others to get support. So if we are in a healthy relationship, the environment and others, then the contact boundary is what we call permeable enough to allow contact, positive growing exchange, but also firm enough to maintain autonomy. And I like to think of this in terms of a big bubble, that we are all sort of, our contact boundaries you can think of as a bubble around us individually. And when we are healthy within ourselves, psychologically and so on, and in healthy relationships with others, then we are able to meet people, we are able to interact with them. Our bubbles come together, and we can exchange ideas and exchange ourselves, meet people, but then we can also break away, and our bubble is still intact, and so we maintain our personality, we maintain our autonomy. So we have an optimal situation, which is that sort of situation where we can come into contact people, we can have a healthy exchange, and then we can withdraw and maintain ourselves and our autonomy. But some problems that we talk about from this perspective is that when the contact boundary is too firm, meaning we are incapable basically of having that healthy exchange, then we become isolated. We aren't able to express and share and participate with other people. Our contact boundary is too firm, too permeable of a contact boundary. the idea of sort of, again, fusing with another that we talked about in the existential perspective. We fuse with others and we lose ourselves. We are unable to meet and pull away and maintain our autonomy. As we talked about in psychoanalysis, in Gestalt we also talk about defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms that have been proposed to deal with anxiety, just as in psychoanalysis. But here we're talking about the anxiety of making real contact with others, or of being uncomfortable with ourselves. So ways we deal with discomfort and making healthy contacts with others, or lack of self-awareness and uncomfortable self-awareness that we try to avoid that create anxiety, we deal with these with defense mechanisms. And some of these look just the same, but they are defined a little differently. So introjection in the Gestalt perspective is similar as it was in the psychoanalytic perspective, accepting the beliefs of others. But it's defined here as the uncritical acceptance. So in other words, the unthinking, we just accept without analyzing and thinking about these beliefs and standards. We accept the values and beliefs of others, and in doing so we lose ourselves. We allow others to define us. Second idea is projection. Putting on others what we cannot accept in ourselves. Again, similar idea. Not taking responsibility for our own feelings and putting them instead on other people. So similar idea to projection in psychoanalysis. Retroflexion, it's a different term, refers to the inability to express our true feelings. So we have anger, for example, to others. We're feeling angry, but we are incapable, unwilling to express our true feelings, so we turn these back on ourselves. So we feel anger toward ourselves. Deflection, which is what it sounds like, deflecting real contact, diffusing real contact through humor, through intellectualizing, or through turning it into abstract ideas. So using these sense of humor, or turning real ideas into abstractions, so that we don't have to deal with them emotionally and we don't have to become personally involved. We deflect this sort of contact. And then confluence refers to joining the crowd, following the crowd, becoming actually one with the crowd. So again, no clear boundary between the self and others, agreeing with others, going with the flow, giving up yourself and your autonomy, giving up who you are by completely giving into the group that you are participating in. From the Gestalt perspective, we're going to talk about two views of the counseling process, because the idea is that the idea of what counseling is about that Fritz Perls talked about is different from what I'd say is the more accepted perspective. So there's the Fritz Perls approach to Gestalt counseling, and then there's other ideas about what is what should happen and does happen in the counseling process. Fritz Perls' perspective was that people seek to avoid responsibility and are looking for ways to get out of taking responsibility. They are using defense mechanisms, using games, using a lot of things to avoid being real and taking responsibility for themselves. And Fritz Perls worked with people in therapy by creating what he called a therapeutic safe emergency. And he would act to confront and frustrate and force people to take responsibility. He would really work to frustrate people sometimes, and make them sort of feel as if they were experiencing a crisis, but this was defined or discussed as a safe emergency because they were within the counseling context, they were within the counseling relationship. But he would really sort of poke and prod people and try to get them through the techniques that he used to develop an awareness of the games that they were playing, the defense mechanisms they were using, and to take responsibility for themselves. And there's a series of videos that I show in the campus class, and I recommend that you view if you have the chance. One of these videos has Fritz Perls working with a client named Gloria, and really provides an excellent example of what I'm talking about with the Fritz Perls approach to counseling, where you see him really sort of pushing the buttons, trying to get Gloria to come to some awareness of how she's avoiding responsibility and failing to be herself. So I highly recommend that viewing. But as I said, there are other ideas about what Gestalt therapy is and should be about. More accepted ideas include that the focus should be on, it's still awareness and growth, but it's just maybe a less confrontational way of going about it. So developing an awareness of the self and the environment, and again, what the person is doing, how they're taking responsibility, really self-awareness, and developing that idea that that we have choices. And second idea is trying to promote growth. If we realize that we can engage life, that we can make choices, we become more fully aware, more fully real, and we are less likely to engage in games, avoid, hide, and reject part of ourselves that we're struggling with. So counselors in the Gestalt perspective, again, it's an active approach. Counselors working in the here and now. We do that a number of ways. Talk about using questions that begin with how, rather than questions that begin with what. How and what rather than why. So why questions lead to going back and looking for the rationalizations and the history, rather than focusing on the present and the how are you feeling now, and how is this affecting you, and what questions. We stay in the here and now through raising awareness of what the person is doing and saying and thinking right now in this moment. So, for example, mirroring and pointing out what the person is doing with their body, how they're expressing themselves physically, how they are expressing themselves in terms of their spoken language. So we may encourage somebody who is referring to you when they're talking about themselves. So you know how people sort of using language like talking about themselves as if they were the third person, and encouraging them to rephrase and restate what they're saying using I. So owning those feelings, owning those things that they're saying. The use of metaphors and following up on the metaphors that people use. So really paying attention to what the person is saying and how they're acting right now in the counseling conversation. Other techniques in the Gestalt approach. There are a lot of interesting and useful techniques in the Gestalt therapy. Again, the focus of these would be, like the focus of the therapy itself is to help the person to develop self-awareness. So reversal The reversal technique is encouraging the person to become aware of the other side, the opposite pole, by acting the reverse of how they are feeling. Be the opposite, to recognize the polarity. So if you are feeling very scared, then you may encourage the person to feel very brave. And how would that feel, and what would that look like? Basically the idea that all these aspects of ourselves there are or exist on continuum. And we all have happy parts of ourselves, and we all have sad parts. We all have anger, and we all have joy, and we all have basically everything that we experience has two sides. And we do sometimes reject those parts of ourselves. We are uncomfortable with the extremes. Uncomfortable. Some people are uncomfortable, for example, feeling and expressing anger. And so they express themselves instead using humor, for example. So the reversal technique would be encouraging people to act in those ways that they're having difficulty accepting. Exaggeration is having the person exaggerate a thing that they are doing with their body, a feeling that they're experiencing, and taking it to the extreme. Again, to really promote awareness, really promote understanding, and really have the person focus on what they are saying or doing. Staying with the feeling. So when a person may be talking about something and develop discomfort, they're not comfortable with what they're talking about, they want to change the conversation, they want to talk about something else, encouraging the person to stay with the feeling, go through it, experience it, and have the courage to face and follow through with that experience. Confrontation, pointing out inconsistencies, pointing out contradictions. So you're saying one thing, but with your body language I'm seeing something very different. So you're saying that you're very comfortable and relaxed, but the way that you are acting, or the way that you are describing yourself in this situation, the way that you are sitting, things like that, they seem very different from what you're saying to me. So what's going on there? Pointing out that sort of difference. Enactment and the empty chair. The empty chair is one of the more well-known Gestalt techniques, and it involves that idea of unexpressed feelings or unfinished business, and frequently we do this when the person has unfinished business with, let's say, in some past relationship, actually using an empty chair to allow the person to talk to somebody in their past who they have things that they need to resolve, things they need to say to. It's also described in rehabilitation counseling sometimes as like people who have had amputations, expressing feelings to literally parts of their body, feelings about the loss of parts of their body, or talking about the loss of parts of their lives. We're talking about other disabilities or experiences. So technique that allows people to express unexpressed feelings, dealing with unfinished business. And enactment is, as it sounds, acting out, using the process of physically acting out some feeling to help the person to express it, to feel it fully, to understand it, and perhaps to accept it. So we just started talking about in the rehabilitation counseling, we use the empty chair or ideas related to that to help people deal with the acceptance of loss, acceptance of different aspects of experience. Gestalt has been applied, fairly extensive writing and applying Gestalt theory and existential theory in the rehab counseling context. And some of the ideas that have particularly been identified as useful include the idea of focusing on the present and helping the person to understand that they do have the power in the present to make choices, to direct their lives, to make decisions. A lot of times we are working with people who have, for all of their lives or for much of their lives, have been involved in systems, whether it's the medical system or benefit systems or employment systems, where it's very possible to start to feel like other people are making decisions for you, and in order to get what you need to just sort of get in line and follow along the process. So systems that encourage people to give up their power and their responsibility. So a lot of people have talked about this idea of helping people to take power, to take the responsibility and the freedom to make decisions and to direct their lives. That's a key idea, the acceptance part, the working in the here and now, and as I said, many of the Gestalt techniques been applied and are useful in the rehab counseling context.